particular concept that comes to my mind as a result of this discussion is the banality of evil. In a sense, that if we look at the nature of wars that the United States has been engaged in the last several decades, these are wars that could be described as sort of deluxe wars. In a sense that the level of casualties, as you have mentioned earlier, is extremely low, yet we're able to inflict horrendous casualties on the other side. And here at home, on the home front, there's really nobody's feeling that the United States is engaged in 2 or 3 wars simultaneously. Except if you read the centerfold of the Washington Post once in a while and you see the pictures of the kid in action. But the average American doesn't really feel that the United States is engaged in the war. And what that has caused, in my opinion, a degree of moral ambivalence. In a sense that Americans today don't really support the war, but they don't also really oppose it. And this has led to, in my opinion, sort of a moral twilight zone or moral ambivalence, in which regular life goes on, and you don't really have to think about it, and yet those people who have vested interest in maintaining what we're doing abroad are continuing without any resistance, and that's why we do not really have any significant anti-war movement. So, and to my mind, this is one definition of the banality of evil.
Maybe just to offer this hopeful element, that the Vietnam War began in 1964. The first time there was any really serious opposition to it was in 1968, 67, 68, and even then, the people who were opposed were considered freaks. It was a good 5-6 years after that war started, when body bags were coming back in large numbers, when inflation was getting out of control, when there were other visible prices that were being paid for the war, that there wasn't an anti-war movement, a significant anti-war movement. But my own feeling, especially talking to audiences of younger people, is that people are closer to mobilizing against these wars than we may think. There was a certain kind of leadership. I'm thinking about the anti-war movement. I have a chapter in the book where, part of a chapter where I compare the anti-Vietnam War movement with the current situation, the lack of a highly volatile anti-war movement now. And I talk about 3 factors. Kind of, not just the fact that the wars are far away and that we've limited American casualties, but that there's a recession. The anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam War movement came on the heels of one of the great economic booms in American history, when people's lives were changing and their expectations were raised, and they were feeling entitled in ways, and also feeling safe, feeling able to take risks, which people don't feel that way when they've just been through the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and things are closing down. And a second feature was that people felt betrayed by a liberal administration which had come into power. I voted for Johnson in 1964. I was one of those who, his slogan, was all the way with LBJ, and there were some of us who said, part of the way with LBJ. On the basis that if he didn't become president, Barry Goldwater would become president, we might have a war in Vietnam. Right? So there was a tangible feeling of betrayal when Johnson sent, cooked up the Tonkin Gulf crisis and then sent 500,000 troops to Vietnam. There was that sense of our parents have betrayed us, our leaders have betrayed us, the liberals have betrayed us. And then in addition to, the economic situation and the betrayal, there were also socially revolutionary, maybe putting it too strong, but socially liberating movements taking place among various sectors of the population, whether it was gays or women or black people or whoever. It was an era of cultural awakening. It was a cultural revolution. So the anti-war movement did not stand alone. It was part of a general movement of cultural revolution. So then you can ask yourself, well, what would it take for those conditions to come into existence again? The end of the recession? Well, that seems to be happening, partly, at least. Feelings of betrayal by the liberals in power? Yeah, there are quite a few people who feel that way. The development of new movements of popular liberation, new forms of communication? Maybe signs of that, maybe some signs of that. Still too early to say if those conditions are going to come into existence or not. But at a certain point here in this process, there's also the question of leadership. At a certain point in this process, a Reverend Timothy Sloan Coffin of Yale burns his draft card on the steps of the church on New York Avenue. At a certain point, Father Dan Berrigan pours blood on the draft files in Catonsville, Maryland. At a certain point, people say, no, I'm not going to take this anymore, I'm going to do something dramatic. And things happen, even silly things like Abby Hoffman, nominating a pig for president. I'm not willing to say that's not possible, are you? It hasn't happened yet, but I think it's possible.